right, and welcome to the Courtenay Turner podcast. I'm your host, Courtenay, and I'm super passionate about moving and thinking. On this show, we are going to dive into all things health, fitness, personal development, lifestyle, and political, sociocultural. I've always been fascinated by people, and I love learning from the experiences and stories of others. This has been a treat for me, and I hope this is enjoyable and useful for you. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or any way that I can make this a better experience for you, please don't hesitate to reach out. Hello, and welcome to the Courtenay Turner podcast. I am here today with Jay Dyer, who has been on twice before, one of my favorite guests. Alex, he does the 4th hour on Alex Jones, and I think Alex just recently referred to you as being the lead researcher and top authority on the New World Order. And he's doing great work on his channel, Jay's Analysis. And I always tell everyone, you know, I'm the annoying person who I send people the white papers, and most people don't really want to read them. Right. So I tell them to go and watch Jay's analysis of the white papers, because that's the next best thing. Yeah. So yeah, because they tell you their plans, and you know, people are telling me how crazy I am, and I'm like, I'm not like predicting things. I'm just sharing what, you know, they've said to do. So yeah. So how are you doing today?
Doing really well. I'm glad to be with you again. We've had really good conversations. People really enjoyed those. So I'm glad to be back. And so you got a new background there with lights and everything. So
I do. Purple is my favorite color. We're working on it. I'm also in the process of trying to set up the in-person studio, but the technology, right? So I'm here in town, we could do that. That would be super fun. The technology is a bit of a learning curve for me. I'm so working on all that. But so I wanted to dive in today. You know, mass formation psychosis is like a very hot topic right now. You know, been codified by Matthias Desmond, and Dr. Robert Malone has popularized it, and Google's banning it everywhere. But it's definitely not new, right? Le Bon wrote The Crowd back in, I think it was 1895. So I thought you could probably speak a little bit to how, you know, these terms get coined, and there's all this theory around them. And then they become weaponized against people. You know, I feel like it's interesting because I think they make it sound like here's the analysis of what's actually happening, but the reality is that a lot of what's happening didn't just happen naturally. You know, a lot of these psychological phenomenons have been created. So
I think the terms, like, I remember having college classes where we talked about mob psychology, crowd psychology, and that's a very well-known thing. Many philosophers have written on this. You know, there's the famous liberal philosophers like Hannah Arendt. They've written on tyranny and mob psychology, and usually it was the people from the left that would critique this because they were interested in the notion that, you know, the tyrannical governments of the 20th century, fascism, Stalinism, etc., these were crowd hypnosis, mob, collectivist controlled entities where people didn't have critical thinking. And the weird thing that's happened now is that what was known as, quote, the left now is in charge of their own version of this kind of a thing, with the religious attitude that people have towards what you're supposed to accept now and what's necessary in terms of the last 2 years of craziness. So what was formerly, you know, 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago considered fascism or the merger of public and private partnerships is now supposedly the face of, quote, liberalism. And it's just a really weird, inverted kind of control structure that has been erected. And so it's not surprising that the very things that classical liberalism studied and tried to oppose would now be the very things that liberal elites push on everybody from the top down.
Right. Interesting. I feel like there is, and this speaks to kind of this idea of the mass formation psychosis being created and then, coined. But I feel like they push everybody towards one direction, and then they blame that. They blame like whatever it is. Like, it's I mean, when you're talking about fascism, communism, they say like that's the problem, but then they use that, and then they blame capitalism, and they create, this is the Hegelian dialectic, and they create the fascist takeover, which is what we're seeing. So when I look at, how they coin it, they say there's 4 things that need to be. There's the masses that we've certainly seen this, in the past 2 years. The masses need to feel isolated and alone. They need to feel their lives are pointless and meaningless. They need to feel a constant free-floating anxiety. And then the masses feel this like frustration and aggression. And of course, then they present, some sort of a solution that everybody is going to, gravitate towards because they're in this desperate state. But I'm curious if you have thoughts on like each of those and how we got to that. I mean, yes, we've gotten to that. I think it's kind of, we can certainly talk about over the past 2 years what they've done, but I think that it's been building for so long. I don't think they could have just done it with the measures that, because 10 years ago, people would never have accepted the measures they used to get us.
Yeah, I think a lot of wartime research played into this. And I just did a talk with Burmese the other day about the RAND Corporation. And the RAND Corporation really pioneered this usage of global fear campaigns. So going back to the time of the Cold War, the RAND Corporation was able to engineer America into accepting this role as needing to be involved in a global conflict in order to save everybody from communism. And while it was true that communism was a bad, evil system, there's a lot of Western elites that were actually funding and fostering communism. And the reason for that is that it's, as you said, a managed dialectic. So I think that if you look at the RAND Corporation's usage of fear campaigns and mob psychology in terms of how to marshal the country into supporting whatever the elites had planned, it's the usage of all these techniques and tactics. And the 4 things that you mentioned there actually come up as strategies and plans that probably, and I can think of some of them explicitly, but probably all of those would have been designed at something like the RAND Corporation in terms of not just academics talking about stuff in random universities that may or may not be relevant, but actually taking academics who have those kinds of ideas, recruiting them into something like the RAND Corporation, and then using those techniques on a mass scale, not just in the US, but globally. And the RAND Corporation, for example, did this with the way that they constructed the fear campaigns around Cold War and nukes. That was all RAND Corporation fear strategies. And they had studied the techniques both of fascists and of Trotskyites and Red Terror. And they all combined those into what we know as neoconservatism, basically. And so it thrives on mass fear campaigns. That's fundamental lesson number 1. And that atomizes everybody because people are the more paranoid, afraid of everything. Oh, then they're going to get nuked at any moment. Oh, there's Russian spies everywhere, right? And you see the same exact plan and strategy and model after the end of the Cold War rolls over into the war on terror. It's the same stuff of managed dialectics of so-called people that are, Osama bin Laden, so-called terrorists who used to work for the CIA. He was part of the Mujahideen that was recruited and set up by Zbigniew Brzezinski in the Soviet conflict to fight against the Soviets on the part of the CIA in Afghanistan. And so these fabled enemies, these kind of controlled puppet cutout figures who are the bad guys, they become the next fear campaign. And if you read 1984, you know that the great terrorist figure there, Emmanuel Goldstein, it doesn't even exist. He's a fictional character. And he is a creation of Big Brother, who is the O'Brien character, who actually wrote the book For the Resistance. So the guy that is one of the higher ups at Big Brother wrote the theory and practice of oligarchical collectivism, which is the supposed book by the terrorist Emmanuel Goldstein. So it's a counterintelligence trap operation. is what Goldstein is. And we could look at things like QAnon as an example of that. But anyway, we're not getting into that. My point was just that the techniques are the same in the war on terror that were used in the Cold War, and they just shifted into something else. And that's why if you read the history of the Rand Corporation, it talks about how they used all those techniques from the Cold War and just applied them to the war on terror and Desert Storm and all this stuff. And they were successful in selling America on these ideas precisely because they had created an atomized population, a fear obsessed over irrational things population. And I think that what we're seeing with what you're talking about, what we're talking about with mass formation psychosis or just mob psychology, is the perfecting of that technique from a scientific vantage point to where they can pretty much just corral the public into accepting anything, because they fall into this kind of catatonic state where they kind of become just passive cattle, and they can't react to anything because the media has done the job of traumatizing them. And sometimes if you do trauma studies, people they don't always just go crazy. They become kind of they enter like a catatonic state, and so they just become these kind of docile creatures from trauma. And the media has the role of being the mass trauma. It's basically just a giant MK Ultra operation. That's all it is. It's to just keep you in a perpetual state of fear and anxiety. And that atomizes, that then causes people to just sort of default to whatever the authority, whatever the experts say. And that's exactly the psychological warfare technique's intended goal. That's why this is so effectual at doing what they want.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm curious. I know you've done so much research on MK Ultra. What do you see as the some of the MK Ultra studies that they've done that are like most effective right now, or that we're seeing the results of now?
Well, today's fourth hour, I covered one of the documents. It's a recent UK Ministry of Defense, German government document on transhumanism. And that document has several sections that cover things that were actual older MK Ultra programs. So a lot of the MK Ultra programs evolved from truth serums and mind control and drugs into bodily modification, biometrics, bioengineering, genetic modification. So it literally becomes like super soldier programs. It becomes DARPA type of stuff. And that is what is being rolled out on everyone through what's going on right now. And the document talks about future plans to either use nanotech or microchips or something like that for the whole population. So all the transhumanist stuff actually comes out of MK Ultra. So that's the biggest thing that I see from MK Ultra kind of being at play. But other more obvious things might be studies into trauma, dissociation, dissociative states, what trauma does to not just individuals, but everyone. And I think a lot of the terror events, part of their job, I mean, they have many functions, but the big scale events, the big nine, the part of the purpose of those things is to traumatize the public. War can traumatize the public, but it's much easier than actually having a war or something like that, than just the media just lying. And so the people default to the media. And so that's like their replacement daddy figure. And some of the documents talk about manipulating people's relationships to archetypal figures like mother, father. And so if one of those entities is missing in someone's life, and hence the advantageous perspective from the state's vantage point to break up the family, because if one of those archetypal figures is missing, or both of them, the default is that the state becomes the new daddy or mommy. Nanny state, daddy state, big brother, right? Big sister. Yeah. And they become almost godlike, basically. Yeah. And I'm not saying this from the vantage point of libertarianism versus statism. I'm saying this from the vantage point of the top, 0.01% that controls all of these ideologies. They manipulate the left and the right, but leftism has a particular destructive quality for the social order. So they will promote all the leftist ideas in terms of the social order to destroy society, to wreck it, to integrate it vertically. And then right-wing stuff is really just kind of a cutout puppet caricature that they used as a controlled boogeyman to scare people. So really, all of these things fit into dialectics, fit into trauma-based mind control, basically, is what you're asking about.
Yeah, I'm curious. So when you say, I absolutely agree with you. Could you elaborate a little bit on when you talk about like the left working through kind of the replacement of archetypes and the social structures, and the right being like the boogeyman? Yeah, kind of.
Well, I mean, and it can be different things at different times. So I remember back after the Big Nine event, if you question the Big Nine event, you were a liberal. And I was always a questioner of the Big Nine event, but never a supporter of, something like the Democratic Party. And I wasn't really a fan of GOP or anything either. But yeah, so I think, what was your question? I already forgot.
Yeah. So how does, I think, how does the left work through the social structures? I think we kind of alluded to that already, but how does then the right, work to, the way I see it personally is that the right kind of does the job of executing it while having the illusion of creating structure and protection. So they do it through these different agencies that are supposedly having our best interest at heart. One of my particular pet peeves is, and this is very much a line on the right, but like, hold the line. You always hear people on the right saying that, hold the line. And I hate that, because I'm like, well, if you're playing a game of tug of war and you hold the line, you keep holding the line and they keep pulling, you're going to be miles down the road, right? So you don't want to hold the line, you want to push back, and you want to question, and you don't just want to hold the line on a premise that needs to be rejected and uprooted altogether. So, but I'm curious, like, if you could elaborate a bit on how the right does that.
Well, the fake right wing does that by, as you said, giving the appearance of supporting order, structure, family, faith, tradition, but those have so evolved that they really don't mean anything anymore, because the mainline right wing is essentially worthless and basically just the left of a few years ago. So it's an ever moving Overton window, as it's sometimes called. So really, right wing and left wing don't really mean anything anymore, except that they are basically all moving towards technocracy. So that's the overriding structure and plan. The left-right stuff is really just totally irrelevant. It doesn't even matter. We've moved into like just total Machiavellian power politics. I mean, it was probably always that way, but I mean, people that are into the left and the right, like they still believe voting is a thing. Like, it would be voting. Elections have been rigged for the last 100 years. So voting isn't even really a thing. I mean, Quigley says that the presidential elections for the last 100 years have been controlled by the elite. So anyway,
right,
trauma-based mind control, I think, is the key to understanding what the media's job is, which is to just really disempower you, make you feel worthless, alone. We even had the tech elite people a year or two ago saying, yes, social media was designed to make you feel alone, to make you jealous, envious, atomized, and to disempower you and to break up families. And so that's actually what it does. It serves that function. So basically, left and right are, I mean, I think probably your audience would agree, they're controlled things. Doesn't mean there's not true and false, but the left and the right stuff is all just a puppet show. But I think that a lot of people are waking up to that. So they're starting to realize that, politics is kind of worthless, but they really do utilize this system to make people feel like they're involved and that their votes mean something and that they're going to change things through voting. And it's just a great way to channel people's energy and time and effort into things that are futile, because the politicians don't really run things. I mean, it's even if you throw out the scoundrels. I mean, do you think that a guy who makes $200,000 a year as some senator or whatever, or $1 million a year, who do you think has more power, him or a guy with billions? Like, who do you think really runs things? So that mythology is still ongoing because people think that, you know, these political solutions are going to do anything. But anyway, it's just, we're just way further down the rabbit hole than, you know, political stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I have two questions. So you were saying that they admitted that the social media was designed to make people feel envious. So who admitted that? What was
it's the developers, and in one case, the major developers, coders, and when one or two cases, the CEO.
Wow.
And the clips are still on YouTube. You can go look them up.
Right. Okay. Wow.
And that's because that's precisely what they're designed to do. I mean, the technocracy is literally there to end the family. I mean, the document I just covered today says we're going to have to give up the idea of moral obligations to family and friends, because the state, in terms of the technocratic state, overrides that. You have a duty that's higher to them.
Wow. So, and I want to get into that, but before we do, what are your thoughts on so we're talking about how we're so far down the rabbit hole that we're beyond the political structure, certainly right, and that they're all really just puppets. And you talked about quickly saying that, you know, elections have been rigged.
Let me be clear. There are some people that do work to get elected at the local level. So I'm not saying every single person is a puppet, but you don't really get into real positions of power, you know, outside of maybe local government, you know, and they even try to buy off the local people, the mayors and people like that, in these UN programs. So even local politicians get co-opted and bought off.
Yeah, I would say I think people should pay more attention to local politics, and then maybe we could effectuate some sort of change. You know, and I think the founders of this country, certainly that was what the structure was predicated on, was that all politics
exactly.
And that is where any power could possibly be attained. Power in the sense of really effectuating change,
right,
self-governance. But I'm curious about the inception of these institutions. So that's something I feel like I have this conversation with people a lot. You know, they're like, no, they've all been infiltrated. You know, this is the argument that I hear a lot, and I don't dispute that certainly certain organizations have been infiltrated, but I think that some have been kind of designed that way from the beginning. I'm curious your thoughts on that, and which ones.
Well, could you be more specific? What kind of,
I mean, some of the
institutions?
Certainly some of the intelligence institutions, you know, and the and even the structure of, you know, the voting system, the two-party system. I guess those are the two kind of big ones, but.
Well, I mean, in terms of, so intelligence stuff used to be a military thing. It was part of the domain of warfare.
Right.
And then as things kind of became more and more academic, so prior to the OSS, there was the inquiry, which is kind of the predecessor to American intelligence. And that was a bunch of nerdy academics that were not exactly a private intelligence group, but it was still not what happens in 1942 with the OSS, because that's actually set up as a adjunct of the top of the pyramid. So the people that are really controlling things, they set up the OSS, which becomes the CIA. They send a bunch of British intelligence agents over to set it up with Bill Donovan. It's more or less private families, Rockefellers, Astors, elite people, really wealthy British elites that helped to set up this parallel structure in the US government, which is now kind of a secret private thing. And that becomes more or less the shadow government. And they're connected to other entities even above that, like the CFR and the Trilateral Commission and Chatham House, Pratt House. These are the Royal Institute for International Affairs. These are all interlinked groups, and they make up various steering committees and think tanks and policy committees that run the Anglo-American establishment. That's who controls the Western power bloc. That's the same people behind the Federal Reserve, right? So that's who runs things. So that shadow government is really just that, from its inception, parallel intelligence apparatus that is really running things. So you're right about that. So I would say from the inception, they were created for that purpose. You could say the CIA, some people even say the CIA is basically just a private army of the Rockefellers. And you could say that. I think that's a better way to understand what that is. And the thing about that is that it doesn't even mean that everybody in that institution for those decades in the Cold War, that they knew everything that was going on, because that stuff is very compartmentalized. So a lot of boomers and, you know, the generation above them, they grew up believing that, you know, they really needed to fight the Soviets. They really needed to fight the Cold War. And again, that doesn't mean the Soviets were good, but it just means that there was a higher level managed dialectic between East and West, I believe, which was always intent on the end goal being a technocracy, which is what's happening right now. So I think that there's multiple things going on. So some people are at the top malicious, they're nefarious. Right. They believe that they have the mandate to do all of this in a lot of these very powerful elite families and organizations, precisely because they don't think that if you just leave it to the population to make decisions, or for local populations to make decisions, that people are smart enough, wise enough, et cetera. And so you need this, you know, top-down technocracy to steer evolution. And the only way to survive is to get rid of, you know, most of the dumb people. And that being, you know, everybody that they deem dumb, which is everybody, you know, who's not in the top, I don't know, 90, 95%. But that's really just a cover plan for the kind of outrageous belief that many of them have that they can unite with technology and become immortal. So there's a sort of a pseudo-religious component to this in terms of transhumanism that most of these people are into. And now they've come out and it's just all in the open. So we've been talking about this for 18, 20 years, and it was conspiracy theory. And now you have these, you know, very prominent public figures like Klaus Schwab writing books saying that that's the goal. So it's all kind of now uncloaked. And that's why they're doing this gaslighting of throwing it in everybody's face. And a lot of the stuff that you're talking about in terms of like saying that this doesn't exist is gaslighting. That's also a psychological warfare technique, is to immediately lie about the thing that you're doing.
Yeah.
I am not having this interview with you right now. What made you think we were having this interview?
Yeah, we're not talking.
Are you having delusions again? I mean, why do you think we're having an interview right now?
Yeah, I'm crazy. I must
yeah,
be.
Right. See, yeah.
Yeah, I have these conversations with people a lot, and I'm really trying to figure out how to bridge the gap. Because, you know, I think people have been conditioned for so long. And, you know, I realize that there are people who are completely, you know, I don't want to say lost, but there are people, you know, if you follow the mass formation psychosis model, right, there's the 30, 40, 30, and 30% of them are completely hypnotized and brainwashed and a lost case. And then there's the 40% persuadable middle. And then there's like the 30% who are, you know, I guess awake and questioning, and they don't actually have the capacity to be hypnotized, which I actually thought that was fascinating. When I first graduated from college, I was a certified hypnotist. And yeah, and because I was an actress, I was looking for like a flexible kind of part-time job. And I ended up quitting because I couldn't be hypnotized, even though I had success with hypnotizing other people and you know, getting them to, you know, change bad habits and quit smoking, things like that. And I felt really good about that, but I couldn't be hypnotized. So I felt like a fraud. I was like, well, I'm doing this thing that doesn't work on me. But
well, the origins of hypnosis are all MK Ultra. Is it William? I always get the two. There's different lawyer debater. There's the guy who was in terms of the. There's like three different. Is it William Jennings Bryan? Isn't he the famous CIA hypnotist? But he was part of MK Ultra. I think that's his name. But yeah.
And what was his role in MK Ultra? What were they doing?
Well, his role was as the CIA's hypnotist. He was like their main guy doing research on hypnosis because that's just part of mind control.
Right. So now they're trying to, so they've done all of these like psychological, they've done the drug mind control, certainly in the, you know, 60s. You know, a lot of that. And now it seems like they're well, they're not paving the way, but they're using the experiments that they've done for the technological remote mind control.
Yes, I'm just trying to make sure I was right. I might be wrong. Maybe it's not William James Bryan.
I don't know.
I wanted to make sure I got that right.
Yeah.
But it's a name similar. Dr. William J. Bryan, maybe.
I actually don't think I know.
It is William W. J. Bryan.
W.
Yeah, so that's the CIA's. Yes, that's him. The pioneering hypnotist. And if you get into MK Ultra, you'll find out that he comes up as one of their top guys. So I always get their names mixed up. It's William Joseph Bryan.
William Joseph Bryan. Okay.
Yes. And he comes up in the Sirhan case, for example. So I think they referenced him. You know about RFK's assassination?
RFK?
RFK. Robert F. Kennedy?
Oh, yeah, the father of RFK Jr.
No, the brother who was assassinated by Sirhan Sirhan. So Sirhan Sirhan was who supposedly assassinated him in 1968.
Okay.
Okay. And he has always claimed that he was mind controlled. And that he doesn't remember what happened that day. And so it's kind of a classic. I'm not saying it's true because he claims it, but the catalyst for the campaign to free Sirhan Sirhan relates to a book written by a British author named Peter Evans, who points out in CIA documents interviews that the CIA hypnotist, Dr. William Joseph Bryan, also worked in mind control programs and was later found dead in a Las Vegas hotel room in mysterious circumstances. So apparently there's a connection between William Joseph Bryan and Sirhan Sirhan, the assassin of RFK. Anyway, the point of all that was just to say that that's who I was thinking of. And I was thinking of it because he's also connected to the RFK assassination.
Interesting. Well, I mean, I don't know, but I would imagine they use these techniques to execute and control different power players,
Well, I mean, so that's the theory, one person's theory, or people's theory about the sleeper assassin. I'm not saying that that's what happened in the RFK case. I don't know, but whether there are CIA programs that were studying hypnosis is beyond doubt. I mean, they, the Enneagram and like the personality profile and test, that all comes out of MK Ultra.
And what are they like? Why? I guess that's,
So that was cooked up by Dr. John Gittinger. And the idea was that if you are, for example, if you work in the CIA, you want to be able to know what a world leader's decisions might be. How will he operate? What are his weaknesses? What are his weak points? What are his strong points? And so if you had an easily accessible personality profile based on a limited amount of facts or information, you might be able to have a good way to categorize that person. Putin is an INTF person who will, I don't even know what INTF, I don't know, but that's why they did it, was to be able to categorize world leaders. But there's also other reasons why they wanted to find out people's weaknesses. And so if you know a person's pressure points and weaknesses, if they were missing, let's say you wanted to influence somebody or send them a handler, if they were lacking a father figure, you would send a fatherly man into their life.
Right.
So that's why the personality assessment program. So it begins in the CIA, and then supposedly they didn't really, it didn't work that well, but then corporations adopted it. So then they just took it from all that research and corporations started using it.
Right. So now I feel like they've taken, to me, I see it as kind of like they build on these different things, they test and then they test and then they use, and then they, do beta testing grounds and see how it worked. And then they build on that. And I feel like the psychological operations that they've done, they had to test and create all these psychological models and structures, and then they test them, see how they work, and then they execute and implement to further whatever agenda they have.
Sure, right.
And now because they are trying to get to this, emergence of essentially the transhuman agenda. So now they're starting to utilize those as mind control. I started digging into some of the research on, I don't know if you looked into Charles Lieber and all the patents he has, right?
Yeah, I was following all that at the time when
were you? Okay.
Yeah, back in, what was it, March of whenever CUFIDs first appeared. That the articles were coming out originally at that time.
Okay.
Which is curious, but yeah.
Yeah. So that was like 20 years ago, right?
No, I'm talking about when he first came under investigation. It was on Department of Justice.gov where they said they were going after him right when the CUFID started happening in March of 2020.
Right.
So that's when they said, they announced on the government website that he's under investigation for, I don't know, espionage for China or something.
Right. But that's, I feel like it's a decoy because most of the research he was doing was on all the nanobot technology and how it can be.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
Control, mind control.
Oh, okay. No, I didn't actually know that. No.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's most of what he has. Like,
okay.
I don't know how many patents, but it's a very large number of patents.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
So he has a very large number of patents and they're mostly on the nanobot technology. And now they're talking about, I just recently saw an article on the DNA antenna that they're using, nano antenna. Have you seen this?
I don't know what you're referring to, but I've heard of this. Yeah.
So they're using nano antennae made out of DNA to create radio waves. Not radio waves, to detect different proteins and different protein structures. So I can only, I can only theorize what that would be utilized for, but it certainly seems like it would fit into this web of what they're doing with, the jabs and.
Yeah. No, I definitely believe that the jabs are nano tech related. And obviously this is a Hollywood sort of over the top thing, but did you see that movie with Samuel L. Jackson and John Cusack called Cell?
Cell? No.
From 26. It's a Stephen King story that they made into a movie in 2016. And it's basically that they're mutating humans into becoming, it's like a zombie outbreak thing, but they're mutating the humans to be controlled by cell towers. And so it's basically that. So it's turning humans into being kind of, the document I covered today called them human platforms. So you're basically a walking router or modem is what the way so the document I covered today on Alex was this one, which is the Transhumanist Document. And it starts off by saying that humans are just kind of, they call them platforms. You're just a platform for the tech that they want to further. And so you will have your DNA fixed so that you can fit into the Borg hive system. And anyone that doesn't is, they say, a security risk because your DNA isn't fixed. And so you can become a spreader, a super spreader.
Wow. And those are the terms they use. So they can put it under the guise of the virus that they're scaring everyone about.
Well, this document isn't directly about COVID, but I'm saying that that's what the document is saying, that in the future, this is a brand new document, by the way, it just came out. It's not an old document, but it says in the future, whoever doesn't go along with being integrated into the global brain system is going to be considered a biosecurity risk, because the current age that we're in, the information age, is supposed to give way to the next age, which is the biotech age. So in other words, transhumanism is the future. That's the next age after the current age that we're in. It's what Klaus is talking about in Fourth Industrial Revolution. And that age, the new age, is to be integrated into the global Skynet system. And if you don't get integrated into it, you're a security threat, because it says, and they'll use the fear, you see. So all of the fear that everybody's under right now, if you haven't had the stabby, you're causing everybody to die, right? Sure. This says the exact same thing, that in the future that they'll just mandate microchips and nanotech for the population, because the people that aren't doing it are the security risks. So they're, what am I trying to say? You know, like, so remember after the Big 9 event, everything became about security.
Yep.
Whether you could walk in the airport, whether you could do this, because there might be a terrorist everywhere. There's terrorists everywhere. So now all liberties have to be surrendered for security.
Right.
And one thing that 9/11 didn't immediately go at the post 9/11 legislature and all that legislation didn't go after was the human body. That's why Klaus says that the next domain is your own body. He says, we will be in your body. We will change you. And that's why the document says that you, in order to do that, the next spear campaign will be that people that aren't chipped and aren't linked into the matrix are security risks, because they are walking pandemic generators.
Right.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? I mean,
that's crazy. Well, the technology that Lieber works on does talk about nanobot technology that can be administered through needles, and it does say that radioactive towers can activate it.
Oh yeah, okay.
Something like a 5G tower could activate it, but that not at the hertz that are used for cell phones. It would have to be a much greater magnitude, but they have the capacity to be turned up to that level.
Okay, well, that's what Brzezinski talked about in 1973 in his book, was that they would do that. So I'm not surprised that that's what he's talking about. I did see the NIH paper that confirmed that there is a connection between the 5 and the stabbies.
Yeah, and the way they say they do it is with payloads. So it's a needle that administers a nanobot technology, and it's a payload that can be activated.
Okay, yeah, gotcha.
Like anything can be used for good or bad. You can have payload. I'm sure they're not doing payloads of vitamin D. That would be great, but
right, yeah.
You know, but the different levels of, when you talk about how they layer it with, you know, they have to create this fear, right? I recently had Dr. Robert Young on, and he talked a lot about, you know, this whole connecting to the Internet of Things. And he said that every time there's been a, you know, viral outbreak, a pandemic of sorts, that there has been some sort of a toxin that's been manufactured combined with some sort of radiation. And that has been true throughout, you know, all of these major, like MERS and, you know, SARS-1. And, yeah, and certainly going, you know, back throughout history, that in all of these different iterations, you know, the quote unquote pandemic that we now need to take these extreme measures against, that there has been that. But I think that that's just interesting, because I think it has so much to do with the conditioning of the medical system, you know, and how, and you were talking about the Rockefeller before, and they were certainly instrumental in changing the medical system, you know, the Flexner report of 1810. Yeah.
So what was the point about the, I missed. So, I mean, I know about the, you know, the history of the Rockefellers taking over the medicine, but what is it that the doctor was saying about radiation? I'm confused. So
he was saying that they've created toxins, and then they're like manufactured toxins. So the example, we'll take the current one, right? That this has been a manufactured toxin, and then it's combined with radiation. So that's creating like essentially like a toxicity that people are responding to.
So in other words, it's dormant until that's activated, you're saying? Or not necessarily?
Not necessarily in this case. I know the technology that, you know, Lieber's working on, which I think is, you know, correlates to, I think, the stabbies. I mean, there seems to be ample evidence to support that. You know, I can't prove that just yet, but that does seem to be likely. But that's separate from the current, you know, toxin that's been manufactured, and then combined with radiation, because we are, you know, in a, we're in a milieu of constant bombardment of EMFs and very heightened radiation. And
right.
So it's not that human beings can't handle radiation. We can. We're detox machines. That's the beautiful thing about the human body. We're designed to detox. But when we're overloaded, and of course, if you don't have I'm sure you're familiar with like terrain and germ theory. If you don't have the internal terrain, I'm not somebody who thinks that there's just, I think people get very caught in like binary thinking. It's like all one, it's all the other. And I think that's the dialectic, right? That's designed that way so that people can argue back and forth about which one's right when it's really a combination. Because even the exosome theory subscribes to germ theory in part. It's just not in the model that we're familiar with, not the model that's been promulgated. So all that just to say that when there's new radioactive technology that's being introduced, then the human body has to acclimate to that. And if you already have high levels of toxicity, or there's a new toxin that's being introduced, that becomes harder, and certain people are going to have.
So this is right. This is a binary weapon. Binary weapons are where you have kind of two different, the active agent and something else that has to be combined with it for it to be active. And one of them might be toxic, or they might both be toxic, but together they really become toxic. And a lot of the global elites talked about doing that covertly in previous documents. For example, there's a section in Arthur Kessler's Ghost in the Machine where he talks about having certain chemicals in the water that will combine with chemicals in the food or in the body that on their own they don't do anything, or they're not that toxic, but when they combine they become very toxic and lethal. And he's saying to get the population down.
Right.
So binary weapons are real. So it sounds like that maybe it could be a form of that, where the stabbies are bad, and then even worse combined with the EMF and the Wi-Fi, basically.
Yeah, and so this is twofold, because certainly it's correlates to the stabbies. The stabbies sound like they're a binary weapon. That, like, I didn't realize they actually wrote about this. That makes perfect sense, and that's why they would implement that. But it's also, the current virus, and these different viruses are also, at least that's the theory that was being put forth. And, throughout history, it does seem like there is a correlation. I don't know. I'm not steeped in virology. That's not my, but I do think that there's something that is being, I think we know a lot less actually about virology and about medicine than what we're being told. And we're being,
I think that's right.
And we're being sold different models so that we can, I hate to be like, super paranoid about it, but I do think we're being sold specific models so that they can then sell us a solution to those.
Sure. Yeah, that's definitely the case.
Yeah.
I don't have a position on the germ theory. I've heard arguments both ways. I don't know enough about it, but I'm fine with being skeptical. Sure.
Right. Yeah. I think and I think this is human nature to some extent, like to, without even being super cynical about it. I think human nature, you want to understand things. And when things become super complex and nuanced for people, rather than being able to admit that they can't deal with the shades of gray and the nuances, and that it's over their heads, they want to glob onto the things that resonate for them, and they reject the rest. So
exactly.
That's just human nature. It's not necessarily nefarious.
Correct.
I do think that it becomes weaponized when there's a profiteering model for it.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally agree.
People who have a lot invested in doing just that. So that brings me to, I'm curious your thoughts on all of we have a lot of I don't know, the buzzword right now is really like controlled opposition. Everybody is controlled opposition. And I think there is a lot of controlled opposition to some degree. But I think it's also a way of, I think it's, in some ways, it's become like the new conspiracy theorist term, which there's actually, I'm sure you're familiar, there was actually a document, I think it was 1035-960, in 1957 to avert any investigations of the Warren Commission. That was how they popularized the term.
The term conspiracy theory, yeah.
Yeah. And it was just a way of shutting down the conversation. And I think controlled opposition has become kind of that new buzzword. So anybody who may be in authority, there are a lot of, quote unquote authorities in this current milieu, where they're coming forth and speaking, and they may be voicing opinions that are predicated on a narrative that's been sold. I don't want to say necessarily a false narrative because I don't know enough to know, but it may be a narrative that's being, sold, and it's a premise that we don't know if it's 100% accurate, but they're being labeled as they're controlled opposition. And I to me, it just looks like it's just they're shutting down both sides of the conversation. It's like, okay, don't look over here, because I'm curious your thoughts on that, and how that's come to be.
Are you talking about in alternative media circles, or people that come out as mainstream whistleblowers that are controlled? Because we saw that Facebook whistleblower from a few months ago, that was totally fake.
Right.
So that one was obvious. I think that the COINTELPRO style operations in January were pretty obvious. So those are things that come to mind. There's also some cults recently that were discovered to have kind of being run by provocateurs. So is that what you're talking about, or what do you mean?
I think I'm really talking about, in the mainstream media, yes, there's lots of controlled opposition. I mean, and that's kind of, I think, much more overt. And I don't think that takes a whole lot of, unless you're completely seeped into the mainstream narrative and you're, that's your gospel, then I don't really think that that's.
Like, you talking about like people that are whistleblowers about the stabbies?
Yeah, that is really where I was going with that. And
I'm sure there's gonna be. I honestly I've heard a lot of the names, and I've listened to a lot of the interviews of some of them.
Yeah.
But I don't actively follow all of these doctors. So
okay.
So I don't have much of an opinion on any of the big name people per se, just because I hear the stories, but I don't, because a lot of that stuff, it's hard to know. I mean, I'm sure there are false whistleblowers amongst those people. But I honestly don't know enough about each of these individual, doctors or people to say. Right.
Okay. I think my concern is just that I think that regardless of whether, we'll just take for simplification, like the germ terrain theory. A lot of people are arguing about that. They take, a polarizing position on it, and then they're going to reject everything that comes from somebody because
right,
creating a narrative that they think is a false premise. But to me, like you were saying before, that not everybody who fought in the Cold War was necessarily a nefarious, sinister person. They didn't necessarily know that they were. They can't see the big picture when you're
right.
If you.
Yeah, I think that really, I mean, this might sound a little arrogant, but not many people see the big picture, because you kind of have to study a bunch of different areas.
Yeah.
And so really you got to be up in like the Kissinger, Brzezinski level of stuff to know the overall plan, because they're the brains that work for, the zillionaires. So they see from that, bird's eye vantage point. And most people, even in academia and government, they're very compartmentalized and focused on their niche. So they don't study cross discipline. So they don't even know what, these other domains are up to. One thing I always strove to do in my research, even though when you go to college, grad school, you'd have to focus a little bit, you'd have to have some kind of areas of focus or expertise. I wanted to not be, limited to one subject. So I always wanted to have a broad Renaissance style, overall type of view. And I think that has helped me to be able to piece together a lot of things and see a lot of stuff. Not that I'm anything special. It's just that I just always viewed it from a grand picture vantage point, and that makes it easier to figure out what's going on. Now, the downside of that obviously is that I don't know anything about virology. That's not my area. I don't have any problem questioning it, but what I can see is what the geopolitical strategists and planners talk about from their books and how they see this stuff playing out. And really, I'm not saying it doesn't matter in the sense like it's not worth debating. You can debate these things, but it's just, I don't think that it's really relevant. I mean, I don't see Brzezinski or Kissinger or any of these people debating terrain and germ theory. Not that you can't have the debate,
Right.
but I'm saying I just don't think it matters to the overall technocratic plan. I mean, they're going to bring that in. We don't. It's not inevitable. They might fail, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I don't know that the theories themselves matter, but I think that the strategy of creating the opposition and then making people the fall guys or making people or discrediting people, it is
right
strategy.
That's a good point. Yeah, cognitive. So that there's a version of that called. Are you familiar with cognitive infiltration?
No.
So Cass Sunstein wrote a paper some years ago, back when he was working in the Obama administration, on psychological warfare and how to disrupt conspiracy movements and alternative media. And his theory of cognitive infiltration was just to get a bunch of government agents to go in and interject a bunch of stupid, idiotic conspiracy theories. And then it just destroys the whole thing and makes everybody look stupid. But he wrote a whole paper on it. It's a well-known strategy. So, I mean, the idea that, there's no such thing as psyops and it's not being done on you is ludicrous. I mean, I had college undergrad classes about this stuff. So
did you really? I wish I had.
Well, I mean, I don't mean about psyops. I'm saying like I had an undergrad class on social theory, and we got into mob psychology. We got into all the different sociologists, Durkheim and all these people, and their theories of how the social works and societies run. So the idea that mob psychology is not a thing is just ludicrous.
Yeah, well, for sure, it's definitely a thing. Yeah, it's definitely a thing, and we're living through it. So I don't think anybody should argue.
Well, I mean, just look at entertainment. I mean, entertainment utilizes mob psychology, right? I mean, the entertainer gets the crowd involved and gets them all hyped up. And I mean, we saw mob psychology at the Astroworld event where people got killed at the Travis Scott concert. So, I mean,
how much of that do you think there's theories being put forth that was, I mean, I definitely think the mob psychology was a huge, and it, if nothing else, it's definitely the groundwork for it. It couldn't have worked otherwise, but there were a lot of theories that because, most people had been stabbed, that there was some sort of testing ground for that technology.
It's entirely possible. I don't have any proof of that, but nothing would surprise me.
Yeah. Well, you heard about the Supreme Court ruling today, I am guessing. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that and where that will lead us in terms of their agenda?
I mean, I honestly don't know what to say about that, because I mean, I guess in one sense, what the Supreme Court rules matters, but in another sense, it doesn't matter, because they continue to do what they do anyway. So I don't really think the global elite really care what the Supreme Court says. So maybe that'll hold off things in the US for a little while, maybe, but beyond that, I don't know what to say.
I guess the only reason I personally see it having any impact, or at least this may just be the eternal optimist in me, but I do think that they really target the US, because I think that the US is, kind of the battleground for free will. My personal belief, I think the United States of America was divine intervention to preserve the free will of humanity. That's just my personal belief. Nobody else has to share that, but that's how I see it. And I do think that they at the very least recognize that the United States is a huge beacon for free will. And that's why you see all over the world, people do look to what's happening here to, hopefully, fight back with some of this agenda. So I think it's really hard for people to deny, although I'm hearing it constantly, that there is this transhuman agenda. and that, any of this, the other thing that Dr. Robert Young did was he did research on the stabs and what was in them, and found that there was the ingredients that were necessary for the stuff that Dr. Lieber tested. Yeah, which was fascinating to me. There are other doctors who refuted that, like Dr. Fleming doesn't think any of it that is in there. So, I've heard mixed opinions, but we know they've written about this agenda. The agenda seems to be
right.
But I would like to think that there's, or at least I just like to hope that there's some way of, I don't know, preserving humanity. So I guess that's why I care what the Supreme Court does, because so I will pose the question to you. What are your thoughts on how we can fight against this agenda? Because it seems to be moving quite rapidly. And it does not seem to be going all that well. So.
Well, I mean, I have a religious worldview ultimately. So I think that the conflict is ultimately not social or political or whatever, or even ideological, but spiritual. So I think that's why I'm not ultimately worried about how things end up, because I think God's in control. There's divine providence. So I know that whatever happens ultimately happens within divine providence. But I mean, the ways that I think we fight back is to be off of the grid, to not live in cities, off the grid as best you can.
Yeah.
To get back to organic ways of living, normal ways of living, families, having connections with people around you, not just living on the internet, not getting immersed in the metaverse, the internet world, being grounded in the real world, eating healthy food, real food. Carnivore diet helped me. All of that kind of stuff. And my show sponsor, chalk.com. So you can get 60% off at chalk.com with J60, JAY60. So, I mean, all of those kinds of things are the way that I would say we fight back. And I'm just not really capitulating to fear. I mean, we're all going to die. So, I mean, this life is short. There's no point in being afraid of everything. And, everybody being hypochondriacs all of a sudden.
Yeah, for sure. So I have, since you bring up the religious, I know, and thank you. I love the experience of going to church. But since you bring up the religious perspective, I have two questions on it. One, so number two in the mass formation psychosis is this, feeling pointless and meaningless. And I'm curious your thoughts on that, because I think this, the erosion of religion has created this, I did my work, my undergraduate work, actually my high school work as well on, I was a philosophy major, and I wrote a lot on the existentialists, and the existentialists were, huge on like Nietzsche, God is dead. Right. And so therefore life has no meaning. I had kind of, and this was probably just, again, the eternal optimist in me, I never saw it as depressing. And, as Sartre says, man is hurled into the world, and thus having been hurled, he is filled with despair. And I never saw it that way. I always saw it as, wow, well, that means that we have some kind of power. We have the ability to, there's a burden in that our actions have consequences. But it also means that, our actions matter. And to me, that was, I don't know, that was inspiring to me. That was hopeful to me. That meant that we're not just this like speck of dust. And not to say that we're so grand and self-important, but I do think that we have ripple effects. And you look at it from the religious perspective, it certainly says, like, I see it as like an ecosystem. And, there's the line, like, you were born for times such as this. So I don't think human beings are meaningless. I certainly don't think that we are God, and nor should we be striving for that. But I do think that this erosion of religion was designed to create this, pervasive sense of despair and meaning.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, worldviews and worldview warfare, which is something that, intelligence agencies and foreign policy strategists and social engineers, I mean, they're very interested in ideas and religion and how they affect people, and it's part of the control structure. So one of the ways that you want to destroy society is erode and destroy whatever that society's religion is, right? So yeah, I think that, and that's not exclusive to Christianity. That's just part of how, just even warfare involves that kind of stuff. So absolutely, they would want to create not just atomized population, but also a nihilistic, meaningless population. I mean, that allows the state to step in to have the role to give you meaning. And so you default to, I mean, humans are just this way, right? They treat the authority figures and the structures like they would treat the archetypal father or mother. And so when the family is destroyed, when the religious tradition is destroyed, those are the firewalls that would be in the way of the state, corporate state, having 100% total control. And that's what they would like to have. And so the destruction of the family and destruction of the archetypes of man and woman, that's a big part of what's been going on in terms of other movements. What that does is that creates a mass listless blob that can be molded into whatever they want, and that's what they want.
Yeah. So I think you're alluding to the like the transgender movement and the right. Yeah.
It's a war on archetypes. One of the global elite documents that I covered was that Silent Webster Quiet Wars document, and it talked about manipulating people through archetypes. And the way the example that's used is the draft, because if you don't go off to war and die for the state, you're a coward.
Right.
And your dad expects that of you. The mom expects that of you. You won't get married because the women will consider you a coward. This is an older document, but the document was pointing out that one thing that the draft wasn't just about getting people to go to war. It was about studying social dynamics and ecosystems of humans and how they relate to one another. And they realized that the draft was one of the most powerful examples of social engineering.
Wow.
So it wasn't really about, I mean, it was about the war, obviously, but
Sure.
that was just part of it. They really wanted to study the psychology of humans in regards to the draft and how people perceive people that were draft dodgers and this kind of stuff.
Yeah. So I have a question about that, but before we get to that, about religion. So do you, I know you've done some work, your books talk about the occults, and so I guess the, satanic worshipers or the anti, God people, it seems like there's such a parallel to a lot of this, I don't know, for lack of a better way of putting it, but just like the Marxist theory, and really the inversion tactics of the occultists and, those documents. I feel like there's a lot of parallel. What are your thoughts on that?
Between occult philosophy and what exactly?
And Marxism.
Yeah, well, I mean, Marxism is a rebellion against everything for rebellion's sake. Ultimately, I mean, it's not exactly anarchist, but if you look at rules for radicals, I mean, it's dedicated to Satan. So the book for I just went blank on that, guys. Who?
Saul Lindsay's book, Rules for
Radicals? It's dedicated to Satan.
Interesting. I didn't realize.
Yeah, so I mean, and I don't think he necessarily really believed in the devil. He may have believed in a real devil. I don't know, but I mean, the devil for a lot of those people is just kind of a symbolic figure of revolution and so-called freedom. But the problem is that freedom isn't like this concept that exists in a vacuum. I mean, freedom has to come along with the rest of a worldview or paradigm. Free to do what? Free for what? What does it mean it presupposes that you have a will, that you're a person. So those are metaphysical ideas that one thing I would say about the existentialists is that they were consciously anti-metaphysics, but the very ideas that they're using are all assuming a lot of metaphysical principles and things that they don't believe in. So that's, I would say, fundamentally contradictory. But why should we what does it mean to be free? Like, why are we supposed to value freedom? Maybe being a tyrant is where it's at. I mean, conceivably, if I'm a tyrant, maybe I'm the most free, and I just trample on everyone else that I don't like. But the point is that whether you agree or disagree, the point is that there's no such thing as just an brute fact a priori idea of freedom without some kind of worldview or philosophy that gives that context or meaning. Anyway, so I don't really, and that's the approach I take to philosophy is paradigms, worldviews. So for me, it doesn't make sense to really think of freedom as just this sort of a priori self-evident concept that doesn't have a context. But I've already forgot your other question.
Free from something, right?
Well, I mean, it's just that freedom is used by a lot of different philosophers in a lot of different ways, and so just the idea of freedom itself doesn't really tell me or mean anything. It needs a whole worldview to go along with it. So what does it mean to be free? I mean, that assumes that you have free will. Free will is a metaphysical position that assumes that you're a being or an agent or a person that makes choices, and being and person are metaphysical concepts. So anyway, that's just the way I think about those questions. And so that's why I'm not a Sartrean or an existentialist, is that, I mean, I understand what they were writing about, but.
Well, I think what you're getting at, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but their framework was mostly secular. So it's not that the concepts were necessarily wrong, but they were coming at it from they were, in a lot of ways, it didn't make sense because they were extracting it from what it's derived from. So like if you have a religious worldview, then you have the belief that you are endowed with free will, right? Mm-hmm. So they're essentially taking this premise, but they're extracting it from the paradigm in which it originated.
That's true. I just think that it's an invalid move philosophically to extract that from any paradigm as if it works on its own.
Right. And
the whole point of Sartre and a lot of those guys is that philosophy is a joke. Like philosophy is not it's lawyers arguing their case, and they're talking about a bunch of things that don't even exist. And so, he would say that all this talk about metaphysics and all this is people hiding behind masks to try to present themselves as the philosopher, or, we're all hiding behind masks, and we're afraid of our own insane level of freedom. We're condemned to be free, and we're afraid of that. So we construct all these masks and these personas to hide behind. And I'm just saying that I think that you could subject his own philosophy to that same critique and say, you're hiding behind the mask of being this existentialist philosopher. Anyway, I know we're not here to debate existentialism, but I already forgot what we were talking about.
I was asking you about the correlation, I guess, between I don't know how else to put it, but I guess the Satanists and the Marxists.
Oh, yeah. Well, Marx wrote poems to Satan. There's a book called Marx and Satan by Richard Birnbrand, and he goes into how the youthful Marx was sort of at some level interested in Satanism, although I don't think that he believed in a real being or a devil, but probably again just seeing him as a symbolic revolutionary figure. So that's the loose connection. Obviously, in my view, a lot of cults and a lot of occult groups are also breeding grounds for patsies, for dupes, for people to be used by intelligence agencies. We've seen a lot of religious fanatics and people coming out of cults that were actually used in entrapment operations and used in setups, used as patsies. I mean, I mentioned Sirhan, whatever the view. I mean, I don't believe the official stories of any of these big assassinations, but whether Sirhan was in fact an MK Ultra mind control person, I don't know, but I think it's possible. But what is certain is that he was a part of an occult group. So he's hanging out with these Hermetic Rosicrucians and is, having these hypnosis meetings and having these weird phenomena occur in his psyche. And then he goes and assassinates, Robert Kennedy. So there's something to obvious. I mean, if you look at Anton LaVey, he wasn't an agent for Interpol before he became a Satanist. Scientology, I mean, L. Ron Hubbard worked for the Office of Naval Intelligence in some capacity. That's intelligence work.
Yeah.
Whether we don't know how high he was or what exactly his role was, but that he did that is a fact. So I'm just pointing out that a lot of cults and a lot of these groups, and even the satanic cults, quite often, they have their provocateur patsy situations going on too. A lot of them are just fronts for CIA or something like that. So, yeah, I view the cults and the Satanists and the Marxists all kind of as just different arms of the octopus.
Wow. When you say that they're fronts for CIA, what do you mean by that?
I mean that there's significant evidence in many cases and documented evidence in multiple situations where the CIA fostered, ran, and used cults as cutouts, fronts to recruit patsies, to recruit, for example, Timothy McVeigh was used in Black Ops for the Oklahoma City thing, as he was recruited or thought he was recruited or sheep dipped into a Christian identity cult. We know that there have been many Muslim patsies who were recruited into radical mosques that were run by intelligence fronts. I mean, a lot of Islamic stuff is a great example of this, like suicide bombers. A lot of those people are recruited because they're unstable people and they make great patsies. So, I mean, I could keep going, but if you look into the odd funding and connections for Jim Jones, a lot of people suggest and think there's good evidence to show that the Jim Jones stuff was a CIA operation. So
interesting. So that leads me to the next question I was going to ask you about what we're seeing right now with the, I guess, just a lot of the geopolitical tensions, right? I guess it's arguable. I'm thinking how do I ask this? So it's arguable that we're already in World War III. I think that would be, or that we've already had World War III. It's kind of a claim that a lot of people make, but that we're burgeoning on the next World War. So there's all these tensions that are being stoked and certainly that are being talked about in the media. And I'm curious your thoughts on how much of it is being manufactured, how much of it is being to create fear, and where we're going, I guess. And
yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the exact degree to which things are just intended to cause fear, I don't know. I mean, it does look like there's a real possibility of conflict in Ukraine. There could be a war with China. I don't know. A lot of people think that that's the long-term global elite plan, is to engineer a war with China and then bring in the New World Order. I don't know. Any of those things are possible. Nothing would surprise me. But I do think that anytime there is a war or something like that, it doesn't just happen on the spot. Right. Wars are planned years, decades ahead of time. You could look, for example, at H.G. Wells's book, The Shape of Things to Come, which was written, I don't know, 5-7 years before World War II, and it predicts most of what occurred in World War II.
Right.
And he was part of that Royal Society kind of inner circle as a propagandist and a high-level Freemason and whatnot, and Marxist. And he literally says, yeah, there's going to be a giant World War II in the next 5-7 years, something like that.
And then we had it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So these wars are definitely, I forgot what I was going to ask you about that. But yeah, they're definitely, it seems like there's, I know we have China, Taiwan, we have Russia, Ukraine. And I am curious about what the potential plans for the global elites are, to the goal.
Well, the plan is to have a massive reduction of the population in the next 10 years. And then by 2050, have the full Skynet technocrat global thing in place, and the hive mind. So 2030 to 2050 is when that's supposed to be rolled out. So I guess the next several years are supposed to be mass death. I mean, I hope that's not the case, but that's the plan. So yeah. Could they use more stabbies? Could they use bioweapon? Could they use a war? Yeah, could be any or all the above. Maybe an economic collapse too. I think that there might be an economic collapse in the next 5 to 10 years or sooner.
Right. Well, that is the Great Reset plan, right?
Right.
That's laid out. So,
Right.
So I remember what I was going to ask you, because you brought up World War II. So we're seeing a lot of things that happened, a lot of the executions of Nazi Germany and the rise of Hitler that are being kind of replayed in, the 2020s version of that. How much do you think that set us up for what we're seeing now?
Well, if you go to my Tragedy and Hope lectures, so I went into analyzing the 1,300-page book by Carroll Quigley, who is the sort of historian archivist of the CFR. He was Bill Clinton's mentor at Georgetown. So he's an apologist, a defender of the Western power structure and what they did in the 20th century. And that book is mostly important for all of the admissions that it has. And it admits, so I lectured through the whole book. And the admissions that it has are things like, yes, the 2 world wars of the 20th century were engineered by the Western power structure elite, the corporate and banking elite, and they did that for many reasons. Obviously, they also have the Malthusian mindset that the population needs to die. They have the attitude that the world needs to be integrated into a global government. They had other strategies and plans, such as the Anglo-American establishment basically exhausting the power and resources and manpower, soldiers of the 2 main rivals to the British Empire and the American Empire, being the Austro-Hungarian Empire and Russia. So the 2 wars and the Cold War did that very thing. They essentially destroyed anything that might pose a challenge or a potential challenge to what Carroll Quigley calls the Anglo-American establishment. And then that allows for Western liberalism to basically win out. It won the Cold War as well. So now we're in this, post-liberal order, which is giving way to the technocracy. So I think that you can go read people back in the 20s and 30s like H.G. Wells, Bertrand Russell, who talked about the coming world wars and how they would do this and how they would set up League of Nations and then the United Nations and then whatever, if anything succeeds that, the new global government. It was all planned, and it's all one coordinated plan, 100%. Now, that doesn't mean they plan everything in the world, but those big events are absolutely planned.
Yeah. So because they have planned so much, and so much of it seems to be successfly executed, and a lot of it, I think, this is my view. So this is what I'm curious your view on. I think a lot of, because people are being hypnotized, because fear takes over, right? That's part of why they're able to have success in all of these really insane and evil plans.
Right.
So so I'm curious, because they've been so successful, if you think that there is any hope in stopping them.
Again, I don't know. I mean, to me it vindicates the biblical philosophy of history, because I don't think that these are completely humanly devised things. I mean, the plans and the knowledge and the strategies, I mean, they're so devious and so intricate and so sophisticated and consistent over, the last 100 years at least, that it really shows that there's something more than just the human domain. There's a higher intelligence, namely Satan himself, who is the source of this plan. And it makes perfect sense why he would be. He hates humanity, and he desires for the human race to be destroyed, precisely because Jesus is the Son of God in the human race. I mean, it's God incarnate as a human. So that's why Satan hates the human race, and that's why he would seek to destroy it. And that is a simple, perfect biblical explanation for what's happening in the world. So anyway, that's my take.
Yeah, no, so I think it's just people need to feel like they're doing something. So I want to give people, right? And I want to give people, regardless of what, what worldview they subscribe to, because I think the more people can take some sort of power and ownership, then they can have some sort of hope. And then the less power that, evil, Satan, whatever your worldview is, has, right? I guess that's really just I guess that's where I was going with that, is just if there is something for people to feel like they can do something, like when you were saying with the Supreme Court, that it doesn't necessarily in the grand scheme of things matter. But I think that people need to feel like it does matter, because they need to feel like they're moving the needle, and that they have some impact, right? That they're,
well, it is. I mean, it's entirely possible. I mean, you could have, is it humanly possible for masses of people to wake up to what's going on and say no? It is possible.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's what I'm hoping. Yeah. I'm hoping that, and that's why I think it is so important to talk about it. And it's important to, and I'm not very good at this, but to meet people where they're at, because I know there's a lot of people who, different, like people who worship the current medical system, and right? And you can't argue with them on it. And so then, and that's part of why this rollout of the jabs has been so effective, is because, well, Big Pharma wouldn't lie to you. They have your best interest at heart. But I think the more, we can educate people, because some people do need just they need to see the linear path. They need to see the logical path. Even people, and I see this from even people who are very, devout religious people, they still need that in order to start waking up to what's going on.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, it's the door opener. Yeah, it makes sense. You would, or you probably wouldn't go through all of these white papers. You're right. So.
Well, I mean, my mom was a editor and a librarian, so I grew up, as a bibliophile. So to me, it's just, I don't know. I've always loved books, so it's nothing for me to read these books and figure out what's going on, and I enjoy doing it. So.
Well, that's awesome. And keep doing it, because
thank you.
Yeah, really, you're doing really great work. And
appreciate that.
A lot of people can't read it. And when I say they can't read it, they literally can't. A lot of people today are not capable of reading. Their attention spans are too short. They have not been taught critical thinking skills. I am astonished at actually, people of fairly high aptitude, arguably decent intelligence, who have really subpar reading comprehension skills.
Yeah, right.
It's and this is where the I guess paranoid part, I do think it's by design, because
yes, it is. You're right.
Yeah. So and that's why I'm grateful that you put forth these analyses, because the people who can't read it or don't have the time, there's also that, a lot of people are in their lives. And so we need to have that information out there for them. So yeah, we'll keep going. And I do really hope the Great Awakening will combat the Great Reset, because that is my hope. So yeah. Well, this has been great. Thank you.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
We'll definitely do it again. And yeah, maybe you'll do it in person next time.
Yeah, that'd be fun. Yeah, I enjoy your podcast, and thanks for having me back. So
Thank you.
I look forward to it.
Yeah, and tell everybody where they can find you, where they can buy your books, and all that good stuff.
You can just go to Jay's Analysis, and there's a shop, and in the shop you can get signed copies of the books there. And then I have a subscription service, and basically just access to the last 5 years of lectures and talks and interviews, and going through all these books and white papers that we've mentioned. We've gone through, I don't know, 50 or 60 of them now. And then a whole host of other things there too. So that's where you can find me.
Awesome. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.